Hi everybody, I'm Juan Collado Díaz, and regularly, Político doesn't do video podcasting, and also we do not upload on the 11th of each month. We upload on the 15th and the 30th of each month, but for this special episode, we needed to upload it today, on September 11th. September 11th was a very tragic event that happened in American history, and many still don't know the full reality behind it. So, I decided that it's time to talk about it on Político. It's a political issue that has affected many people and have killed many more. But I couldn't do this alone. So I tasked my friend Chris Andrus to come over to Político and be the host of this episode and its continuation, because this is a two-part series, which you can listen to episode 1 now, wherever you get your podcast, or you can watch it here on YouTube and Spotify.
Chris Andrus. Since the 9/11 attacks occurred, I've been deeply curious about the true circumstances behind it and why it often appears to be an inside job. To explore this further, I've invited an expert to join me for the special episode of Político. With me I have a San Francisco Bay architect Richard Gage, AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation along with his courageous wife Gail at richardgage911.org. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. The organization he founded, AIA 9/11 Truth, now numbers more than 3,600 architects and engineers, demanding a new investigation into the explosive destruction of all 3 World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. As an architect, he has worked on most types of building construction, including numerous fireproof steel-framed buildings. Most recently, he worked on the construction documents for a $400 million mixed-use urban project with 1.2 million square feet of retail, parking structure, and mid-rise office space. Altogether, about 1,200 tons of steel framing. So without further ado, welcome, Richard.
Oh, thank you. It's awesome to be here with you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, we're very excited to have your expertise.
And Richard, do you mind sharing a little bit what got you into 9/11, like the exploration of the behind the scenes and, to look into this whole narrative of what really happened?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked to hear this interview by David Ray Griffin, who's now written 14 books on the subject of 9/11. I mean, I was hearing about the evidence, much of which we're going to be hearing today for the first time in my life. I'd never heard any alternative theory as to how these towers came down, much less that there was a third tower that came down on 9/11. I'm thinking, well, what world did I enter? It's like a parallel universe, right? So I had to pull my van over. I couldn't even drive and listen to this at the same time because he's talking about the ends of the beams, molten metal, a third tower coming down at free fall acceleration, the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. Witnesses of explosions before the tower even collapses, the Twin Towers. So I had to find out if this was true, and I went and I heard him. He was speaking the next night at the Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, and I went, and they were sold out. 600 people were packed into this theater. I had to go home and watch it on the live stream, and I just remember being, this can't be real. I'm an architect. I'd know if the third tower came down. We study these things. It should have been the most studied structural failure ever. So I did some research over the next few weeks. The guys at work thought I was nuts, 14 of them. But I put a PowerPoint together and I learned PowerPoint. I'd never spoken in public. And here I gave this presentation to them about all this evidence graphically. And they all agreed with me because I bought them pizza. They had to come in and get a free pizza. And I had them captive for 45 minutes. They raised their hand at the end and go, yeah, you're absolutely right. We got to have a real investigation. These are controlled demolitions. And those were my first 14 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And now we have 3,600 architects and engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation. And we are just going and going and going. In fact, we have a conference September 10th through the 11th. If you can still tune in now and watch that conference, because it's live streamed by the Redacted platform, Clayton and Natalie Morris. They have 2.7 million people who are watching that show. So now the 9/11 Truth Movement is in a position to appeal and reach an incredible audience, a relatively new audience to this information. Plus, Senator Ron Johnson, who's been calling for a new 9/11 investigation and who's the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations, he is going to be leading our conference, the keynote speaker. This is the first time in history that's ever happened in the 9/11 Truth Movement, having the attention of a senator, much less having one speak at our conference, much less having him be the chair of the investigation committee who has subpoena power to get a real investigation, like he's done and is still doing with COVID and vaccines. So yes, this is an exciting time. Tucker Carlson will be addressing the conference as well, who's been tucking his tail between his legs in the last year, because apologizing to the 9/11 Truth Movement because he scorned and ridiculed us 20 years ago. Now he's singing a different tune. He's making his own documentary on 9/11. He's saying that everything they told us about 9/11 is a lie. And he's promoting his documentary at our conference via live stream. So we're all very excited to be addressed live by Tucker Carlson too.
And before we continue, and we go to your, you have a presentation that you want to go over. You're gonna enlighten us with this, because I'm not gonna lie to you. I am part of like the people who definitely have do a lot of insight, and so has Chris, I believe. And it has been through a lot of amazing work that you have put together here. And I've been actually a follower of your work for many years. As of today, that's what I was like very, very inspired when I heard like an opportunity to just sit down with you. And I wanted to go over, do you mind explaining a little bit of what the presentation, like a small description of what the presentation will cover before we get into it?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at the evidence for the explosive demolition of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. And we're going to start with Building 7. We're going to show that the evidence shows nothing but a controlled demolition, and a classic implosion. Then we're going to look at the very explosive event as of the Twin Towers, which were hit by planes. So we're going to walk all the way through that evidence for you today.
And I wanted to leave a message for those following on an audience at home from Apple Podcasts and Amazon. If you want to see this episode, which is a very special episode, on YouTube, you can find it by visiting the Inquisitor Media's page on YouTube, and then you'll be able to see the full-on video, but it's also available on Spotify as full-on video. Everywhere else, it will be audio, just for those listening at home.
Let's see how long YouTube lets us keep it up is the problem.
YouTube can be an issue. Google is the big censor these days.
They really are.
So, Richard, I'll let you take it away.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. It takes a lot of courage to look at this evidence, because, there's 2 parts of our brain, right? There's the logical part, which can get this, like I did 19 years ago, like you guys did, like others have. But there's a part of us that holds back, because the implications of these controlled demolitions is that this was an inside operation. That this was a betrayal by our own government against us, murdering 3,000 people, manipulating the American people into war, with the media leading that march, invading Afghanistan and Iraq, killing 2 million people, and losing $6.5 trillion on a global war on terror, all because of fraud. Now, that's a lot to take in, and it turned me upside down, inside out. It's like I got hit over the head with a 2x4. It's not comfortable. And then I started to get really angry because I'd been lied to. You know, you're not gonna lie to me like this. Now, they granted been lying to us all our lives about all kinds of things. I learned that later, but this was my big wake up moment. So prepare yourself for that at home if you're not familiar with this information. We'll start out easy. Building 7, theoretically. I mean, according to the official narrative, nobody died in this building. This was a 47-story skyscraper, easily the tallest building in most of our states. It wasn't hit by a plane, but it received some damage when the towers went down, because it's only 100 yards from the North Tower, about a football field length. And it did get some damage. But NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people, finally came out with their report 7 years after 9/11 and said, no, that damage wasn't a significant factor in the building's collapse. Well, let's look at that collapse. Here's Building 7, upper left. You see the eastbound house drop first, and then 6 seconds later, the entire building does this. After witnesses hear explosions, by the way, which we're going to show you, it comes straight down uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint, really fast. And so this was explained again 7 years later by Shyam Sunder as primarily due to office fires. Office fires. What office fires? These office fires. These are the few and scattered and small fires that we have in this building. And so, yes, they're actually saying that this building was brought down by these fires. And they focus their initiation of collapse theory on this floor 12. And they say, as you can see in their fire simulation, that the fires were raging on that floor. Now, they say 4 o'clock here, but they imply that they're raging all the way through the collapse, which happens an hour and a half later. But fires only burn in a given area 20 minutes. And you can see in the photographs that these photographs completely pull the rug out from underneath NIST. Those fires are burned out on that floor, even before 4 o'clock and at 3:50. But they rely on these fires causing thermal expansion of these long spanned beams, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column 79 and causing floor 13 to fall in 12 and so on for 9 floors. A progressive collapse, they call it. And then this instability traveled laterally across this football field length building in just 6 seconds, they say, but it turns out to be a half a second. I go into this in much more detail in other more extensive presentations, but not one of the components of their theory makes any sense. And we've exposed this in our documentary series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. Taking the hard evidence of crimes to court, we've produced 4 episodes already. And so you can see that on our website, which is partially seen here, richardgage911.org. So let's look and see if we've ever had a fire bring down a steel frame fire protected structure like these. No, not in history, not one. This completely is unprecedented. And we have fires since 9/11 that are fully engulfing these buildings. Again, not one has ever collapsed. There's a whole number of reasons for that. Fireproofing is one of them. These buildings are fireproofed. Well, what could it be if it wasn't fire? Well, let's compare it to a known controlled demolition on the left. Building 7 on the right. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame, fire-protected structure, ever. Well, let's look at the features then, one by one. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, here's Dan Rather telling us what? That it looks like dynamite, deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. Well, that's very helpful, Dan, but you never told us that after 9/11. In fact, we've never, with any, let me show you these videos. Um, he's never repeated this whatsoever, ever. So I can hear him talking here, and he's saying, this is amazing. It looks just like those old hotels. And so we've got 11 videos of this building's collapse, but not one of those has been shown, with two exceptions, in the last 24 years. Two exceptions. We've never seen this building come down. It's been swept under the rug. I'm one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects. We didn't get one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure in modern history after the Twin Towers. So, yeah, we've got to figure out what else is wrong with this picture that they've fed us. Feature number 2. Is there a straight down symmetrical progression? Let's look from West Street. Yeah, pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do you accomplish that? Well, you have to take out all the core columns within a fraction of a second of each other, a millisecond. And followed about a second later by the perimeter columns. Any deviation in that pattern, and you begin to have problems, real problems. This is a science. It is not something that happens by fires, these fires. If you don't get it just right, you can have all kinds of problems. If the explosives don't go off right, you can have that, and somebody has to walk into this building and fix it. The explosives, right? Not going to be me. So, yeah, but NIST is saying that the damage in the northeast corner caused this building to collapse symmetrically. Well, wait a minute. Buildings that are damaged on one side, they fall to that side. They fall over. So we would have expected, if there was going to be a collapse, Building 7 to collapse to the damage by fire side on the northeast, or the damage by building debris from the North Tower on the southwest corner, but not straight down. And how fast? Free fall. Physicists have timed this, and it comes down at free fall. For a third of its 7-second fall, it is falling as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. The bowling ball has no resistance. That's how it can accelerate, increasing velocity every second. That's the definition of acceleration. And free fall means no resistance. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel, 3 to 5 times stronger than it needed to be to support this building. Well, gosh, we have NIST finally admitting that after denying it for 6 years because they couldn't afford to admit it. But they were publicly embarrassed in a press conference in 2008. And they finally said, yeah, you're right. It came down at free fall. But they don't acknowledge the implications of that, which is what? That not one of these columns gave any resistance. Well, wait a minute. Where did those columns go that they didn't provide any resistance? Even columns that are bending and buckling and breaking provide a minimum of 25% of their original strength. But no resistance here? Did these fires accomplish that? No, not going to happen. So we have to look at the pile and ask ourselves, what can we learn? Well, this was a 3 to 6 story building, depending on how you measure it, pile. I mean, it was a moment resisting steel frame structure where the columns and the beams are rigidly welded one to another. And yet it falls like a house of cards with the columns and beams severed, the concrete pulverized. Buildings that fall naturally, like these in earthquakes, the columns and beams are not severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. We recognize the building, though damaged. It's still recognizable as a building. Doesn't fall in a haystack pile like that in 10% of its original size. No. We've got did these fires do that to this building? No. And so we have to ask ourselves, what could have done that? Well, explosions can do that. Controlled demolitions are based on explosions. Replaced explosions throughout the building and synchronized to go off at certain times. Well, are there witnesses of explosions? Well, there's plenty of them. Here is one. You won't hear it, but he says they're trying to make a call, and all of a sudden there's this huge explosion that goes off in the vicinity of Building 7 in the late morning of 9/11 after the towers collapsed. There's also witnesses like this. Daryl, a medical student, who says we were watching the Building 7 because it was on fire. The bottom of the floors were on fire. And we heard a sound like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, the windows busting out. It was horrifying. But a second later, the bottom floor caved out and the building followed after that. We saw the building crash all the way down to the ground. Well, wait a minute. That doesn't sound like fire, or sound of a clap of thunder. How about Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, who was doing triage in the building, and they were moved back. And this is what he says. You heard explosions, like ba-boom. And it's like a distinct sound. It's not like when compression, like boom, 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 floors crashing on each other. This was ba-boom. You felt the ground rumble like you wanted to grab onto something. To me, I knew that was an explosion. No doubt in my mind. And Bill Rosati, who says, I was standing 2 blocks away. All of a sudden, I just seen a big flash and I've seen the building coming down and people running everywhere. A big flash and then the building coming down. Barry Jennings was one of the people who were called to a meeting at the emergency center, management center in the Building 7, along with Mayor Giuliani's attorney, Michael Hess. And they were late to the meeting. They didn't realize the entire building had been evacuated. So they got up there to the 23rd floor. And this was after the 2 planes hit the towers, but well before they came down. These guys are in the building trying to get out because they were told to get out of there. And they're on their way down, and they got to the 8th floor. They started walking to one side of the building, and that side of the building was gone. And the first explosion was on the stairwell landing at the 6th floor. Then kind of blew us back to the 8th floor. Another explosion, like a boom, like an explosion. And more than one? Yes, more than one. And they told us, get out of here because there's more explosions, reports of explosions. So, and then we have 3 dozen structural engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation, like Kamal Obeid, who says a localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of columns at key locations within the building. Well, this caught the attention of the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Hulsey, who does a detailed analysis comparing 2 very high-profile quality engineering analysis software in this dynamic analysis, which corroborated each other's results in doing the analysis that NIST was scheduled or tasked to do by Congress, but which failed miserably. What did they learn? They finally learned that in order to make the building, the computer model do what the video did in reality in the center, we had to take out all the columns in the building. Well, that's what NIST ended up having to do, but obviously they failed because their model crumples up like a beer can, even though they released 400 structural steel connections, failing every second, which is not even natural under any circumstances other than controlled demolition. And it begins to tip over. So they stop their computer model 2 seconds into the global collapse. So what were the conclusions of the Halsey report? Fire did not bring this collapse, cause the collapse of World Trade Center 7. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. The thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders. The collapse of this building was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST. So they completely pulled the rug out from underneath NIST. And we've given this report to every member of Congress and gotten very few, if any, results. So
And
we
Richard,
have.
I did wanted to ask
Yeah.
you a question relating that. So if I'm correct, steel regularly takes to be melted itself is 1,370 Celsius, which, if I'm correct, translates to about 25 Fahrenheit. So
Well,
to melt steel, and the temperatures of those fires can never be that hot. Am I
we're
correct?
going to get
In
to
those
that.
buildings.
Yeah, we have a whole section on the melting of steel and the temperatures of fire.
Oh,
So
then I will let you continue. Then I apologize.
okay, that's okay. Since I'm going to cover it anyway, we'll just go right into it now. We have persistent extreme heat as part of this evidence. And your point is dead on, Juan. We have the metallurgical examination of the steel from both Building 7 and the Twin Towers. And all of this information regarding extreme heat applies equally to the Twin Towers. Now, what do they find? The metallurgical examination that the FEMA report did before NIST took over the investigation and threw it out. Never before observed. Intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like we see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel with silver dollar size holes. Guess what? Juan was right. Fire cannot do this to steel. We have 300 degrees Fahrenheit, 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to melt steel like this. Fires typically only get a quarter or maybe a half of that. They document rapid oxidation and sulfidation, which fires don't do. Liquid iron, that's molten iron. That's 3,000 degree Fahrenheit iron. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. This is all documented by FEMA. They don't know where the sulfur came from. NIST later says, oh, maybe the sulfur came from the gypsum board. No, it's never turned around and attacked the steel that has been designed to protect for 100 years. Gypsum board has calcium sulfate in it. It's completely different than sulfur. So all of this, or most all of it, was omitted from the NIST report. And the FEMA report author, Jonathan Barnett, fire protection engineer, says, gosh, steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. What's the problem with that? It takes 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit to evaporate steel. And yet that's what we're seeing, and we'll show you more. We can tell by the luminescence of molten metals like this what its temperature is. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit here. That is incredibly hot. Again, probably 3 times hotter than those fires that we showed you were, at least 2 times. The worst case fires mathematically are 1,830 degrees Fahrenheit. We're almost twice these temperatures. And we are more than twice these temperatures in some cases. This engineering firm says jet fuel burns in open air only about 600 degrees. Some say twice that. Even so, we're far beneath the capability of creating molten iron. What can create molten iron? Can thermite do that? Oh, are you hearing this? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Um, you get a sense that thermite burns at 4,000 to 5,000 degrees, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the steel. So maybe we're getting somewhere here, because if thermite were used, it I'm looking for that slide. There we it would account for the iron, which is elemental iron. It would account. This is not steel. We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. Cast iron, elemental iron. So where did all of this iron come from? Why was it molten? Why was it 4,000 degrees? Thermite explains that. Thermite also explains the presence of sulfur in all the World Trade Center dust. Sulfur found in the mixture, because sulfur is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. And it would explain the presence of molten iron droplets found in all the World Trade Center dust, previously molten iron. Found by who? The U.S. Geological Survey, not conspiracy theorists. 2005, they find previously molten iron droplets, billions of them. They document them very well. Well, where do these come from? Well, they're molten iron, meaning thermite. They're spherical, meaning they were ejected from, they were aerosolized essentially under explosive conditions. Liquids form themselves into very small droplets, the more pressure there is. Just an aerosolized spray bottle will show you that. And so the EPA says, gosh, there's so many of these billions. They're a signature component of the World Trade Center dust. In other words, it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has all these previously molten iron microspheres in it. But we don't know where they came from. And neither does the USGS. They don't speculate. NIST doesn't discuss it at all. And FEMA ignores it. But there's up to 4 tons of it in all the World Trade Center dust. 6% of some of these samples are previously molten iron microspheres. RJ Lee Group, another environmental consulting firm who does independent analysis on the dust, they say they're formed during the event, not before, by the welders putting the building together, not afterward by the iron workers taking the building apart, but during the event. Well, where do they come from? We could do an experiment, guys. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Let's light some thermite. See what happens. Look like sparks, but they cool and they fall into the pan as previously molten iron microspheres. Yes, that's what happens when you aerosolize under some pressure, even a little bit of pressure like you just saw. They turn into spheres. So that was all evidence of ignited thermite. It can only be that. Is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Yeah. A team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen are sent 7 independently collected samples. And they start to look at them and they find these curious red-gray chips. They look like paint chips. They're dual layered, so they were applied with a fluid like paint, but unlike paint, they're attracted to a magnet. So they have a high iron content. Primer paint has iron in it, but not enough to be attracted to a magnet. So they get real curious and they look carefully at the red layer with X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy and find what? Quantities of aluminum and iron. The signature of thermite. What is thermite doing in all the World Trade Center samples in these red-gray chips? They get real curious. They zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and they find particles of iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets that are 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. This is a nano scale, nanoparticles. They're set in a matrix, a bed of oxygen, silica, carbon, organic material, which is used in TNT, C4, etc., to expand rapidly with the gases and knock things over. That's how explosives work. Whereas incendiaries work by means of extreme heat. They burn things up. So we have explosive composites based on thermite reactions. It's called superthermite. It's developed by Lawrence Livermore Lab in 2001, whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed at the nanometer size scale. They stumbled on something that was already been developed for the Defense Department. You see, when you get these particles so small, the surface volume increases exponentially, and you have an instantaneous chemical reaction. You've engineered an incendiary to become more explosive. Well, what happens when you put these in a differential scanning calorimeter, a heater which measures the resultant energy? When they ignite at about 850 degrees Fahrenheit, they produce an exothermic reaction. Well, that's exactly what the samples from the team of international scientists found. So they found that this stuff is superthermite. More importantly, when they ignite, what do they produce? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found and documented by the USGS and R.J. Lee. So we know exactly where those molten iron microspheres came from, as if we didn't know. They're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. So this is a set of self corroborating, repeatable experimental data that could be used in a court of law or a grand jury investigation to bring the real perpetrators to justice. This stuff is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It's made only in the most sophisticated Defense Department contracting laboratories. And they conclude in this paper that the red layer is active, unreacted thermitic material, incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. This was peer-reviewed in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal in 2009. We've had this for that long. We've given this report to every member of Congress at least once and gotten very few successes in terms of adequate responses. And so we are talking about the 10 key characteristic features in Building 7 and some very uncharacteristic features with incendiaries. Fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all of them. With additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, this becomes proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that we have shown to thousands of architects and engineers. 3,600 of them signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation. And so we've, in many of them appear in our forthcoming series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, ongoing series. We've produced 4 episodes, and I encourage everybody to look at those episodes. We're presenting the evidence in a courtroom, in a boardroom to the grand jury, the stand-in grand jurors. You can see it at 911c2c.org. That's the website for 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. You can also see it here at Richard Gage 911.org. I encourage you to look at it. And when you do, you're going to see evidence that leads you to ask the question, what about the Twin Towers? Building 7 was obviously a controlled demolition. Were the Twin Towers a controlled demolition? Well, look at them. We show them simultaneously being destroyed here to show how identical they are, even though they have different damage from the planes, different damage from the fires. We have upward, outward arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, laterally ejected at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists, trailing thick white smoke clouds, landing up to 600 feet in every direction. Wait a minute. Why is structural steel trailing thick white smoke clouds? Steel is not flammable in office fire conditions. Why is it on fire? Well, what does thermite do? It lights steel on fire and burns it up and cuts it and issues aluminum oxide ash, thick white smoke clouds of aluminum oxide ash. So let's get into it. We have characteristic features of controlled demolition to look at, beginning with, is there a sudden onset? Well, the North Tower is standing at rest, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. No jolt, no hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below. Same with the South Tower. It's standing at rest, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. So why isn't it slowing down even? We'll look at that in a moment. But let's see if the top part is driving the rest of the building down to the ground, which is the official narrative. Well, is it? It's going down, but make it easier. Look at the lower red line, the point of plane impacts. There's no movement in the video down from that point. It's not crushing the building below. It's crushing itself. It's being destroyed. It's telescoping in on itself. It's gone in 2 to 3 seconds. Fascinating. If it were crushing the building below, we would see it crushing the building below. But none of the photos, none of the videos show that. What they do show is core columns remaining 900 feet in the air for 6 seconds. And then they get a blast below and they fall straight down through the concrete powder, which has been shaken off of it. And fascinating. This is not a collapse. In fact, what does it look more like? Which one of these is a volcanic eruption? And which one is the World Trade Center North Tower? Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects, trailed by thick white smoke clouds, ejected laterally. Yeah, the volcanic eruption is the one on the right, but they are darn similar. Let's look and see what could cause such devastation. Are there explosions, witnesses of explosions, that see them, that hear them, that see flashes of light? Well, there's 156 first responders that were recorded orally, all of whom, these are a subset of the hundreds, but all of these saw explosions, heard explosions, felt explosions. 12,000 pages of testimony finally put on the New York Times website. And what did we learn? Professor Graham McQueen read all 12,000 pages, and he found 156 of them. And here's a few of them. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. Again and again, you're going to hear the specific order of events. They're seeing something, they're hearing something, they're feeling something before the tower comes down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. Shook my bones shortly before the first tower came down. I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. You saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw a flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top, simultaneously from all 4 sides. Materials shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this fire chief, this expert witness, need to be? There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. NIST says there are no witnesses of explosions. I just read you a few of the 156 first responders that were orally recorded within a month after 9/11. They claim to have interviewed 116 first responders. They must have missed every one of these or omitted their evidence from their final report. Is this important evidence? Is this relevant to the understanding of a crime and how the building came down? Yeah. It was swept under the rug completely. Feature number 3, is there a straight down symmetrical progression? Well, the South Tower actually begins to tip over. It's tipping at about 22 degrees. So we have asymmetrical loading on the building below. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires, asymmetrical damage from the planes, the broken columns. How in the world then do we get complete symmetrical damage all the way down each face of the building? It makes no sense. Just like the firefighters described, all the way around the building, like a belt, all these explosions. Let's zoom into the leading corner of those explosions. In this looped video, I see about a dozen independent, relatively small explosions, one of the thousands that are destroying this building. We've been completely gaslighted. We were told this was a natural collapse. What we're seeing is a building being blown up in all of this evidence, but this becomes more clear than ever. And this is not a nuclear weapon going off. These are must be independently pre-placed explosives. It's not directed energy weapons, somehow targeting floor by floor the destruction of this building all the way around like a belt in a synchronized fashion. Did you guys want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've heard them called squibs before.
Yeah, where the squibs are actually a little different. That one on the bottom is an isolated explosive ejection. And let's look at those in detail. Good call, Chris. We've got these squibs occurring 20 stories, 40 stories down below that zone of destruction. They even occur as far down as 60 stories below. There's no accounting for these whatsoever in the official narrative. They're obviously mistimed explosions, isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry, as you see here and here also. It's a dead giveaway, as is the dozen of them going off on the left side of the South Tower as it begins to lean right. It's destroying the structural integrity of this building such that it doesn't maintain its angular momentum and fall off as a rigid body reacting off the part below and fall onto the street in a unified block. No, it's being destroyed, so it just essentially falls like a sand or something back into the building. Well, how fast is this building coming down? Almost free fall acceleration is clocked by physicists, in this case, David Chandler, physics teacher, 2/3 of free fall acceleration, almost as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. It's accelerating it's gaining velocity every second. The definition of acceleration, it's not slowing down when it meets what? 80,000 tons of structural steel beneath the point of plane impacts. Not even slowing the process down. It's getting faster and faster and faster. Those exterior columns are not even doing the job. There's 240 of them. There's 47 massive core columns in the center. None of them are doing the job. Well, why? Well, we can see here. They're laterally ejected, feature number 7, which is a very unusual feature of controlled demolition, impaling themselves in skyscrapers all around the World Trade Center towers, destroying the Winter Garden 600 feet away, destroying the Deutsche Bank building that far away. You see, these structural steel sections are 14-inch square built-up columns with 4 bolt holes on the ends. So they're simply bolted. These 3-story columns are bolted one to another vertically. And all the plane had to do was punch in these structural steel sections, breaking the bolts and the splices in the case of the spandrel panels that connect those to the next one to the side. Fascinating. You can see them up there still, the bottom part of that remaining building. But these sections are ejected laterally, 4 and 8 ton structural steel sections, trailing what? Thick white smoke clouds of aluminum oxide ash. That is the only thing it can be, because steel is not flammable in office fire or jet fuel conditions. They are obviously freely flying. This is not peeling like a banana, back to, forward to, back to. Wait a minute. How does gravity work, guys? Down. What's going on here? Out. An incredible force is hurling this 4-ton structural steel member toward Building 7, trailing, again, thick white smoke clouds. There's enough energy here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. That's a lot of energy, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. In fact, they are issued in a 1,400-foot diameter around each tower. They are ejected well beyond the boundary of the World Trade Center. As you can see, impacting Building 7 to the north also, and then the World Financial Center to the west. So we have to answer a key question here. If 100,000 tons, or darn near all of it, is distributed outside the footprints of these buildings, how is it available to crush the building? This is 1/3 of the weight of each tower. And almost all of it is outside the footprint. Here we see the footprints. The steel is well outside all of the footprints, in landing as far away as Building 7, for instance. So it's not available to crush the building. What could have crushed the building? Maybe it was a concrete. Let's look, because we're missing some concrete, like 110 floors in each tower of concrete, each of which were an acre in size, poured 4-inch and 8-inch thick concrete on metal decking supported by lightweight steel trusses. We don't find 100 of these assemblies. We don't find 50. We don't find 10. We don't find 1 acre size floor. We don't find a 1/2 acre, a 1/4 acre, or a 1/16 acre size floor. What in the world happened to all of these floors? The pile reveals that we only have a miscellaneous pile of steel. What happened to them? In a real pancaking collapse, like this one in Mexico, we have pancakes. This is an earthquake. Or this one, earthquake in Myanmar, Thailand, which destroyed this Bangkok, Thailand building. Excuse me, Myanmar, Burma is where the earthquake was. Bangkok, Thailand is where the building was, 33 stories. Well, wait a minute. Let's compare that 33-story pile, which is like 6 stories tall, or 7 or 8, to the pile of the North Tower, which is like 3 or 4 stories tall, maybe 5. But that was 3 times the height of this building. Why is its pile 3 times higher than a 110-story building? Well, we got to find the concrete. Where did it go? Ah, there it is. Pulverized in midair. 90,000 tons of concrete pulverized to a fine powder. What can do that? Heat can do that. American Society of Testing Materials report C856 says at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, white powder decomposed hydration products, sand, gravel, cement paste. That's what 1500 degrees does. What can 4,000 or 5,000 degrees do? It could pulverize all the concrete if it were applied to the underside of the decking. It would evaporate those lightweight steel trusses, evaporate the decking, and powderize the concrete. This is shown in the Fire Safety Journal as well. Concrete specimens subjected to a temperature of 2200 degrees Fahrenheit were completely decomposed. We have twice those temperatures with nanothermite. And the analysis in this abstract shows over 1200 degrees Celsius, I think it's 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, decomposition of concrete and melting of concrete too. That's where the concrete was. But wait a minute. If that's what happened to the concrete, and the concrete was distributed from river to river across lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area in a blanket 3 inches thick, then is it available to crush the building? No. That's another third of the weight of each of these towers. Together, that's 2/3 the weight of each of the towers. That's completely not available to crush the building. And yet all of that weight was used by Zdeněk Bazant from Northwestern University in Chicago, and a paper that was submitted just 2 days after 9/11. The rest of us are freaked out, right? When's the next plane coming? Who's doing this to us? Not this guy. He was in his den creating the most complex piece of mathematical wizardry that took engineers 10 years to decode. And when they did, they found that not only did he use all of this weight, but he doubled the mass up above by a factor of 2. He decreased the column strength below by a factor of 3. The whole thing was rigged in favor of a collapse. Well, we've seen evidence to support the destruction with explosives and incendiaries in these buildings. Fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all 10 of them, with additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony. This is proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that has convinced now, again, 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition, to be a part, many of them, our 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom series, which we're inviting you to be a part of too at home. Co-produce the series. We're in post-production where we edit these films, and it takes your support to make this happen. For $500, you can be an executive producer listed on the credits. So join us, be a part of the team, and look at the other documentaries we've created as well. 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out, where we have 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence. A simple 15-minute documentary just on Building 7, narrated by actor Ed Asner. You can watch these for free on our website, richardgage911.org. You can see the DVD, the documentary film by Dylan Avery, that 7, which is a story about the University of Alaska's report on Building 7. You can download for free the outline of all of this evidence and share it, print it, and share it with everybody that you know. It's all on our website. We got to get to the truth about 9/11 because, after all, we have been sold a bill of goods, manipulated, murdered, and manipulated emotionally to support a war in Afghanistan and Iraq, as we mentioned. So where do you draw your line in the sand? Are you going to be like Chris and Juan and speak the truth? Or are you going to just let others speak it for you? Because we're about to lose our country, guys. We need you to pull your heads, for those of you who are not doing anything, not sharing this information, not sharing the other great podcasts of Juan and Chris. You've got to speak the truth. I hope your conscience will compel you to do so. Because when you do, you'll find it's not too late. We haven't lost our country yet, but we're running out of time. Thanks, guys.
Of course, we're happy to have you.
Thanks.
Absolutely, and thank you for this presentation. It was amazing, and I think one of the questions that like came out of this whole thing is that I'm assuming, not just assuming, but by the presentation, people now are probably more aware that it was absolutely an inside job.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that I think I always had is, why was that an inside job? Is there what was the reason behind, the endless lives taken away, the infrastructure being destroyed, the panic, it was just an attack for, we have all this evidence, but there's like no reason explained with the government, like the reason why would they do something so awful to the people?
Well, they're not going to explain the truth about that. What they tell us, of course, is that they want us, they hate us for our freedoms, so they're attacking us, all of which is a complete lie. They're patsies. The fundamentalist hijackers were shown to be promoted by the CIA, put in traffic school, probably not even on the airlines that took off from their original locations, which are probably not the planes that ended up hitting the building. We're talking about a complete theater here designed to manipulate us. Why? Well, what did we do immediately afterward? You got to follow the money, cui bono. James Corbett did an incredible report on this. 9/11 trillions, follow the money. It's free on YouTube to watch. And just look at, for instance, at Afghanistan, which provides 90% of the world's supply of heroin. When the Taliban had choked that off, when we invaded the Taliban after 9/11, in 5 years, it went from 185 metric tons by UN standards up to 6,500 metric tons, and held at that level until we were kicked out of Afghanistan, and the Taliban once again cut off the production of opium in their country virtually back down to 100 or 200 metric tons. So we know what we were doing in Afghanistan, in addition to manipulating them to trying to force them into running a pipeline from the Caspian Sea down to Pakistan through Afghanistan. And they were told they were going to be bombed. They can have a carpet of gold or a carpet of bombs. They were told this in a meeting in Germany by Richard Armitage. So you have that, which never happened because they wanted to work with Brazil. So they were declining Unical's offer, and they got the carpet of bombs for sure as a result. Iraq. Why are we in Iraq? Well, was it for ties to Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden? No, that was another lie. The oil was nationalized by Saddam Hussein, and now it is controlled by foreign interests. So there's lots of good reasons to have created this false flag operation. Not to mention, it helps the greater Israel and the surrounding of Iran by U.S. bases, 100 of them in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, and that goes absolutely in depth, and it's such a like rabbit hole pretty much once you go in. And I think that's where as I mentioned at the beginning, where Chris and I were so excited when we got to connect, because many years ago I tried to do something like this and connect, and the persons that I had, they backed away, and I'm pretty sure they were silenced. It's the group that I'm like part of, and I'm pretty sure they were silenced because they knew too much. And I think that's one of the biggest things. It's another thing is the censorship behind this kind of media. I think we have been censored really big time, and the believers that know, and the people that actually know and understand it was an inside job, have been censored so badly that, as you said, it's really good when we have people like us who actually believe it, but not only believe it in our houses, but also come out to educate and tell other people about it. And that's impressive. There's people like you doing this work because it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. It's very necessary. We're going to lose our country. We're already halfway or 3/4 of the way into a full-on totalitarian police state. As soon as we go with the CBCD, can you say that correctly? The digital currency from the central bank. We're going to be rolled up, digitized, and we're not going to have any freedom. Our ability to buy things are going to be instantly revocable. So that's just the beginning of our problems. COVID presented a false flag operation over the last 4 years, where they manipulated us yet again with a major false flag, which is the creation of this false disease with the false solution for it, which is neither safe nor effective. What were they doing if it wasn't safe or effective? They have a depopulation agenda. They have a desire and the means to track us at that level in our bodies. That's been proven many times. So, yeah, we have a whole lecture on that, the parallels between 9/11 and COVID, and also the parallels between 9/11 and Gaza, another false flag operation.
So do you think 9/11 happened as a control tactic?
That's one of the many motivations that they had, controlling us with the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012. Any of us can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can be tortured, even assassinated today as American citizens. All of our phone calls, our emails, our texts are swept up instantly, automatically, and stored in the largest building in Utah for use against us. Completely unconstitutional. But they made it legal somehow under this emergency, which we're still under 24 years later.
No wonder the government wants to get rid of landline phones for us, because then they can track us on everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing.
I want to say, thank you so much for joining us. This has been very educational. And for those people listening at home, this is one part of a two-part series that we're recording. And to open your eyes about the 9/11 attacks and, to understand more. This is our way to actually remember those that we lost that day and to pay respect to the people by bringing out the truth. And, there's no better way to pay respect to someone who either give their lives or suffer because of this tragedy than us ourselves. Exactly. Not than just ourselves actually spreading out the truth. So yeah, this is our way to say, hey, we remember and we are with you.
And we know why you actually passed away. We're not going to fall for the bullshit.
No longer.
Hi, listeners. Thank you so much for watching. This and all episodes of Politico are part of the Inquisitor Media Originals, and it was hosted by me, Juan Collado Díaz, with production assistant and hosting by Christopher Andrus and our guest, Richard Gage. You find more about Richard's work and his organization, visit richardgage911.org. And to find more about Politico, our advocacy work, and all sources for this episode, visit www.politicopod.com. Thank you so much for listening.